Up next, you talk about a strange story. Dr. Mary's monkey, how the unsolved murder of a doctor, a secret lab in New Orleans, and a cancer-causing monkey virus are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, and emerging global epidemics. Up next, Ed Haslam on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Now, you're going to take a journey with me tonight, and it is indeed a journey. Let me tell you first of all about our guest, Ed Haslam. Spent his first 35 years living in New Orleans. He personally heard and saw things that involved the investigation into the JFK assassination, the murder of one of his father's colleagues, and claims of biological weapons to be used for political purposes. Haslam's 1969 comment, if there is a bizarre global epidemic involving cancer and a monkey virus 30 years from now, at least we'll know where it came from, states his concerns very clearly. Here he is, Ed Haslam. Ed, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, George. I'm fine.
My pleasure. And I noticed a forward by a guy I respect a lot, who's going to be our guest on Coast to Coast this coming Monday, Jim Mars. There he is.
Yes, Jim's been with me on this story for a long time, and he's been a great support, and I talk to him all the time, and it's good to have him on board. In fact, I'm doing the forward to a book, and he's doing the afterward to it that'll be released here in a couple of months now on a woman who's the witness in my book, and we'll talk about her a little bit, but it's Me and Lee, which is her relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald in 1963. So Jim's definitely a member of the party here.
Ed, this is an incredible story, and when I say incredible, I'm putting it in quotes and in big letters. It is one of the strangest mysteries that I have ever read or come across. But I want to ask you about you, first of all, because that is equally strange. I mean, you're not a doctor. You've been in what, the advertising business?
Yeah, and that was my career. I think of myself as a writer nowadays, but I grew up around medicine. My father was a professor at Tulane Medical School, which is how I got my initial leads on this story. And this story really came to me. I didn't go to it. I just grew up with the pieces surrounding me, and it was like I had this big puzzle, and one day I sat down and started to lay out the pieces and connect the dots. And the problem with the story, and I put problem in quotes there, is the fact that when you look at the story, each piece fits in with each other piece very cleanly and very logically, and it's only when you stand back and look at it that it looks really as strange as it does.
Tell us a little bit more about your background now, and then how you got involved in this kind of research.
Well, I am a professional writer by just due to my advertising background. But really, what you were talking about in the 1950s and 1960s, when I grew up in New Orleans, is where I started being handed the pieces of this. And it was all, I couldn't explain it to anybody because I didn't have the Internet and the libraries and the documentation that we have today. And it wasn't until, and I did have this fear, as you pointed out by the quote, from 1969, that we were going to have this terrible global epidemic involving cancer and a monkey virus. But that was difficult to explain to people, too, until it showed up. And then in the 1980s, when the mainstream scientific establishment started saying that AIDS was a mutation of a monkey virus, I started to have real serious concerns. And then I heard some information about some similar sounding stuff in New Orleans, which all tracked with these pieces of the puzzle that I had collected over the years. And I said, somebody has got to lay all this stuff out and compare what we know about the people that were mutating monkey viruses in New Orleans in 1960 and this never-seen-before global epidemic that's killed more people than war that's sweeping the planet today. And I initially really started looking for the flaw in the argument because I wasn't real anxious to be the messenger on this, and it's not a particularly happy story to come out with, but when you start to realize the dimensions of what I talk about in the book, you realize that it was difficult for me not to write the book once I realized what was at stake. And I felt the American people and the people of the world, because it affects all of us, really had the right to know what has happened to us, because we're not being told by the mainstream media. And in fact, they're party to the hiding of all of it.
And you believe that cancer is caused by a virus, don't you?
Well, it's not a question of my believing it. It's today, well, for the second half of the 20th century, from 1960 to about 2000, that was the official position of the medical community, was cancer could not be caused by a virus. In fact, I have a document from the American Cancer Society that lists 200 possible causes of cancer, and the word virus is not even in there.
Good point. Ed, stay with us. We're going to be right back on Coast to Coast as we talk about Dr. Mary's monkey. Yes, we'll tell you about Dr. Mary as well when we come back. Our guest tonight, Ed Haslam's with us for the full program, author of Dr. Mary's Monkey, and it's an incredible mystery. It's an incredible story. If you like podcasting, by the way, you might want to pick up Streamlink for just pennies a day, so you're guaranteed always having these shows for you, no matter where you go. Simply go to coasttocoastam.com and sign up for Streamlink. Back in a moment with Ed Haslam on Coast to Coast AM. And you were talking about how the medical community had 200 some potential thoughts on cancer, but at no point did they mention viruses.
Yes, and before that, right before, that started in about 1960. In 1959, I have a copy of Time magazine from July of 1959, and the cover article on it talks about the new war on cancer through virus research and chemotherapy. And in that article, they talk about two of the women that play a big role in Dr. Mary's Monkey. One is Sarah Stewart, who was the scientist who proved the existence of the cancer-causing virus in 1957. And the other one was Bernice Eddy, who we'll be talking about more later, and she was Stewart's research partner. And the two of them discussed the possibility, since they have proven way back in the 50s that viruses cause cancer, that there might be the possibility for a cancer vaccine. Now, we're sitting here in 2010, and the pharmas are marketing the HPV vaccine, which is the human papillomavirus. So they can no longer say that viruses don't cause cancer because they're out there marketing a vaccine to stop a cancer-causing virus. So they've run out of excuses now. And when I started talking about this story back in 1995, I was way out on a limb by myself talking about cancer-causing viruses. But here we are 15 years later, and the scientific community has finally come around.
Who is Mary? Dr. Mary's Monkey. Who is Mary?
Well, Mary is Dr. Mary Sherman. She was from the Midwest originally, from Illinois, and she went to the University of Chicago Medical School. And for those who are not familiar with that, that's a big powerhouse owned by the Rockefellers. It's every bit as prestigious as Stanford or Harvard or any of those other places, but it's a little bit lower profile, because it tends to really involve the Nobel Prize level scientists more than the football teams or the student body.
Sure, and it's in the Midwest, Ed, where I am right now, and generally colleges, and there's some darn good ones. Washington University being one of them here in St. Louis. You're right. They're low key. They don't have that Ivy League feel to it at all, and so people kind of brush over it. It's one of the great medical schools in our country.
Yes, and Mary Sherman was from there, and some of the things that are unusual about her is, first of all, she was officially an orthopedic surgeon, which is a bone doctor, which my father was also. My father tended to be more of the surgeon, the guy in the operating room with the scalpel. She, however, was more of a pathologist. She studied the nature of disease itself. In fact, she was the chairman or chairperson, whatever you call it nowadays, of the pathology committee of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. And the other thing about her was she was a world-class expert in the use of radiation. And she is published in that area, and